If you enjoy Legends of Bass, please consider supporting me on Patreon. My patrons have access to great rewards, like bass tabs for every piece I play in this video. Click the link in the description to learn more. Hey guys, John here with another episode of Legends of Bass. Today we're going to conclude our three-part series on Chris Wolstenholme of Muse. It's been a lot of fun making the last two episodes as well as this one. I already had known some of these bass lines for years, but this series gave me a chance to dig deep into some of the older albums and learn some things I hadn't learned before, as well as some of the latest stuff off of Drones and The Second Law. Before we get down to the bass lines, I just wanted to take a moment to thank all my patrons on Patreon for your continued support. Thanks a lot, guys. Big shout out to my biggest supporter, Chris Slade. Really appreciate it, Chris. If you haven't had a chance, go ahead and click the link in the description to check out my Patreon. There's a lot of great stuff to be had there. My patrons have the ability to vote on future players that I'll cover, which songs I'll cover for the series that I'm working on. You can download tabs for all the songs that I play in every video, and the list goes on. I really want to make the Patreon sort of the home base for Legends of Bass. Even if you can't donate or become a patron, feel free to go on there and post suggestions, ask questions, whatever you're into. Patreon's the place to do it. You can find my bio on there. A lot of good stuff there. Check it out. Alright, so now let's get back to the bass playing. So in our last video, we got through Absolution and Black Holes and Revelations, and today we're going to pick it up and we're going to go through the rest of Muse's studio albums through their latest Drones. So the first song we're going to talk about is from The Resistance, and that's the song Uprising. This one I remember also being a big hit on the radio. I guess you could say that about all these Muse singles, you know, they're a huge international rock band. But this one I do remember hearing quite a lot, and you hear it a lot at like sports venues and stuff like that. The bass line is not really anything too crazy, but I included it because it has that just signature synthy growl overdrive, distorted fuzz, super crazy bass tone that Chris is known for on certain lines. And in order to achieve this, I combined a couple different things here. So what you're hearing is sort of like a sub-octave distorted bass along with a synthesizer bass. It's similar to that one I used for Time Is Running Out. So a few different things combined here. But overall, it makes for really a crazy, over-the-top tone. Here it is, Uprising. Next song we're going to talk about from The Resistance is the song Resistance. This song, I remember the first time I heard it, and right away the bass caught my ear. Of course, I'm probably a little biased being a bass player, but how can you not hear that just excellent sort of octavey, filly, groovy kind of thing that's going on in the chorus? And that's exactly why I chose this song. Leading up in the verses, you have sort of a simple picked, descending kind of minor melody going down the neck. But when the chorus drops in, you just get that excellent, again, very groovy. He could have easily played some root notes or some little, riffs, but he has this very groovy bass line which drops into just that hard hammering distorted chorus where you hear that classic overdrive with a little bit of that scoopish wah kind of sound on there. Sort of a combination of everything that makes Chris great. Check it out, guys. Resistance. The next song we're going to talk about from the Resistance is Undisclosed Desires. Now, this is one that, as a fan, it's not my favorite song because it's, I'm really into sort of the hard rock Muse, and I really love everything as a whole that they've put out. But Undisclosed Desires is sort of more of that electronic kind of sound. But to me, where it really shines is the bass line. Here you have a very rare thing, at least if I rack my brain, I can't really think of another Muse bass line that has a slap part in it. And the chorus is built all around that here. I mean, of course you have the different electronic synths and stuff that build up this song, but that bass line that hits in the chorus, again, it's rare to hear a slapping Muse bass line, but it really locks in with those drums. Great sort of chorus sort of little effect on there. Very mid-scoop kind of slap tone. Not too difficult, but it really brings a nice texture to the track. Here it is, Undisclosed Desires.
I'll make you feel pure and trust me. You can be sure. I want to reconcile the violence in your heart. I want to recognize your beauty's not just a mask. I want to exorcise the demons from your past. I want to satisfy the undisclosed desires in your heart. You trick young lovers that you.
All right, and that's going to take us to the last song we're going to talk about from the Resistance, and that's Unnatural Selection. I had to include this one because it is just sort of a throwback to that sort of Origin of Symmetry sound. Big, heavy, rocking, fuzz, overdriven bass, crazy riff. Something interesting about this one is, I see a lot of people playing it online, and they actually, it's a drop D song, but what's interesting is Chris actually downtunes the A string as well to a G. And the reason that is because it's a lot easier to play. I actually saw an interview with him when doing my research for this last episode that around Unnatural Selection, that he had worked it out in just drop D tuning, but he realized it could be a lot easier to play, especially on that second part of the verse, if he just made the A string tuned down to a G. That way he can just play it open. And you'll see that here, but a lot of you who may know the song or on bass, and you might be playing it in a more difficult way than you need to. Just down tune that A string. Anyway, really fun one, overdriven, really riffy, and then you get to that high chorus part where he goes all the way up the neck and it's really busy. This to me is just another Chris Wolstenholme bass line. Here it is, Unnatural Selection. That's going to take us to the next album in Muse's discography, and that is The Second Law. This one was very interesting when it came out. I remember a lot of fans, myself included, were a little bit confused because if I recall, one of the first things I remember being released on Facebook or YouTube or whatever was Unsustainable, which this was sort of, I think, 2012. So this was the sort of a big dubstep time, and there was a lot of Skrillex and this kind of stuff. And when I heard that, I was like, what? Is this what Muse is now? It's like this sort of EDM stuff. Of course, they just sort of were giving us a taste of what The Second Law had to offer, and there's quite a bit of what I would consider to be classic Muse sounds on the album. But the album's actually interesting. It has quite a variety of sounds, probably the most varied, I think, within one album. You have songs ranging from the very sort of orchestrally numbers like Survival, to the more EDM poppy things like Follow Me. Madness kind of reminds me of like 80s Queen. Panic Station. I mean, I remember hearing that and being like, whoa, Muse has this whole cool, like, funky sound now. One thing's for sure about this album, it's got a lot of good bass playing. And the first song we're going to talk about from The Second Law is Panic Station. Now, I just mentioned a second ago that Panic Station is sort of this funky kind of different sound from Muse. And right off the bat, I loved it. I heard that sort of jazz bass kind of slap, combination of slap and sort of octave, sort of disco playing. Very dancey, very fun, funky number. I loved it too because I think at the time, at least on some of the live performances and such, you saw him playing it on a jazz bass, which I don't think he was really playing since all the way back in like the showbiz era. He's got a lot of these like modern boutique basses and stuff. So as a jazz bass player, I really thought that was cool, and it was this whole new funky sound. But just a really groovy line. Check it out, Panic Station.
Face
going to talk about from the second law is Animals. This is one that, again, right off the bat, I sort of, the bass caught my ear. It starts off with that kind of Fender Rhodes electric piano thing that Matt plays, and that sort of loops throughout the song, and you have the bass line and the drums dropped on top of that. Very rhythmic, everything's sort of interlocked. The bass plays really well with the drums. It keeps, sort of using the same rhythm throughout. When you get to the pre-chorus, it's a little different, but even though there's a lot of chord changes, it's keeping that same rhythm. And it just, really shows how Chris can balance, what a bass player needs to be in terms of holding it down and, backing up the chords, but at the same time, getting a little, melodic, moving around. It's just a real solid bass line, and it's one of my favorite Muse songs. Here it is, Animals. Talk about just one more song from the second law. There were quite a few on this album, and I only chose 3, but I wanted to be able to fit the last 3 albums in this video, so I had to do a little cherry picking. And the last song we're going to talk about from the second law is Liquid State. Now this is an interesting one. It's one of 2 songs on the album that Chris sings on, where he sings lead vocals, and you haven't really heard that on any previous Muse albums, and you didn't really hear it on Drones, the album after this. So it was kind of an interesting thing. There's 2 songs, and Liquid State is one of them, and it's got this great overdriven fuzz hard rock bass line. What I really like about Liquid State is that it has this sort of pattern that repeats throughout the song. You see it in the intro, and then it goes into I covered the first 2 verses. At the end of each little phrase, he plays this repeating little thing on the D string. And after each new phrase, he goes back to that pattern on the D string. So it's kind of like new little melody, back to that. New melody, back to that. And it sort of builds up this tension as he climbs further up the neck. And then it drops into the chorus, which it's actually a little bit of a different melody, but still the same pattern and still doing that style of playing one melody back to the repeating riff, another melody back to the repeating riff. So it creates a nice tension, and it's very heavy. And all of that aside, this is a pretty busy bass line, and I saw them play this live. I was looking right at Chris. He is just playing this like it's just nothing to him while singing, and had great vocals throughout the whole song. So this is an impressive one, and just a really solid bass line. Here it is, Liquid State. and that's going to take us to Muse's most recent album, which was Drones. Drones is another album where I feel like, as a fan, I, spent a lot of time on the subreddit and watching reviews on YouTube and stuff, and it seems like people were kind of torn on this one as well. I think it was a little bit more of a return to mostly hard rock. It's a mix, but I think the songs that are sort of the singles and a lot of the heavier numbers, they have that sort of Rage Against the Machine, riffy stuff. And it makes sense because a couple of the riffs, I think it's the main riff of Psycho and then it's the end of Reapers, are both like jams that they've played for years and years, since probably like Origin of Symmetry, or at least probably Absolution era. So it kind of makes sense that it's that older Muse, that hard sound, because they ended up just developing those jams into songs here. The first song we're going to talk about from Drones is Psycho. This is an interesting number. Starts off with the screaming drill sergeant, and then you go into that heavy riff. And that's just where I jumped in. You start off with that nice high, fast little rhythm on the D string, and then boom, it drops into the drop D. Really heavy, that big Chris overdrive, great fuzz tone, and then you go into it walks up, and it's basically I'm pretty sure him and Matt are playing the same thing, so it just makes for that classic sort of riff rock that I've come to love from Muse. And then you have this great little piece which repeats at the end of the choruses, where he does this big walk down. And in the middle of the song, he actually walks back up. But what you'll see in the clip here is he does this great walk down the G string, down the D string, down the A string, all the way down to the low D. And that always stuck out to me. I always liked that part, so I included it here. Check it out, Psycho. That's going to take us to the next song on Drones, which is Mercy. Now this is quite a turnaround coming out of Psycho. Definitely more poppy, definitely more sort of melodic, accessible sound, if you will. But it has a really great bass line. This was another case where, Chris could have sort of laid back and said, oh, I get it, it's these 4 chords, and he could have did like, some easy root notes, maybe a little... throw a couple thirds in there, whatever. But instead, he actually has this really nice, busy bass line with sort of an unpredictable rhythm. The way he spaces out the notes, and, he could have just sort of made it very straightforward, but it has a very, original feel to it. And then the chorus is very straightforward, kind of pop rock, heavy. But then when you come out of the chorus, he plays the verse again, but it's a little bit of a variation, which you'll see at the end of the clip. It's a fun one. Check it out. Mercy. right, the next song we're going to talk about from Drones is Reapers. This one is a lot of fun, really sort of great, 80s rock tapping intro, like a Mr. Big or like a Van Halen type thing at the beginning of the song. Really fun. I remember I had to pick up the guitar and learn that once I heard it on the album the first time. But a lot of good bass to be found here as well. It starts off, in the clip you'll see, he does this great tension building climb, and then boom, you drop right into that that drop D, the sliding with the heavy distorted bass tone. And then you jump into this really fast and frantic descending sort of riff that he goes down the D string, starting all the way up at the high D at the 12th fret, and then just sort of notching down the scale, and really fast, a little bit of a stretch there for my short little sausage fingers, but I think I got the hang of it after a while. Really fun one, and then you jump into that really great, again, like sort of 80s arena rock, fun chorus that makes me want to just jump up and down. Check it out, guys. Here it is, Reapers. Well, that's going to take us to the last song that we're going to talk about from Drones, and that is The Handler. This one has a great heavy sound. Again, another drop D song. Really got that sort of deep, muddy, overdriven bass. And some great riffs here. Again, where Chris could have been sort of phoning it in. He does some really exciting stuff. Especially here where I pick up the clip. I think it's the second verse of the song, where the bass has a few lead riffs on every other piece of the verse. And then when you go into the chorus, there's this super busy, super fun walking part where he goes up and then all the way down and then back up the neck, and there's a lot of like little chromatic notes in there. Really fun, really original, really spices up the song. Great sound, and really just a heavy song. Check it out, The Handler. Guys, well, that's going to do it for our last episode on Chris Wolstenholme. I hope you enjoyed all of his great, amazing bass tones and bass lines. So much to be heard on these albums. For a relatively young band, they've had an unbelievable career and put out some unbelievable music and some of my favorite songs ever. Again, if you haven't had a chance, please check out my Patreon page. A lot of good stuff to be found there. I'll put the link over here. Also, my band, 21 Kings. Check us out, follow us, subscribe. As always, guys, please like this video and share some of your comments with me. Let me know what you thought about this episode and Chris's bass playing in general. Let me know maybe some of the better bass lines that I missed that I should have included. Anyway, guys, as always, thanks for watching and stay tuned for the next episode of Legends of Bass.